welcome everybody. I'll declare the meeting open and welcome everybody. Sorry, I'm just working. I'll just add that we acknowledge the Whadjuk people as the traditional owners of the Greater Fremantle-Walyalup area, and we recognise that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important today. I will practice my noongar and get better at it before I have another go. Attendance and apologies. We have leaves of absence from Mayor Hannah Fitzharding and Councillor Doug Thompson is actually here. Welcome back. I believe Councillor Pemberton will arrive. She's not an apology at this stage, so she may be just on her way back from work. Disclosures of interest from members. Are there any? Councillor Kamada.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Archibald. Yeah, I'll have to fill in the paperwork, but I have to declare an interest in FPOL 22. An impartiality interest in 2207-3. -4 for the Fremantle Oval Redevelopment Business Plan, being a member of the South Fremantle Footy Club.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Others? Councillor Sullivan.
I presume if I speak on it, I need to declare an interest. So the same interest in the same matter. Impartiality.
Yep, you both declared them previously, so yep. Thank you. Okay, we are up to number 4, responses to previous questions taken on notice. I don't believe we have any, do we? No? Okay, public question time. Do we have any members of the public wishing to, whether it's online or not? No? No, okay. Thank you. Petitions, there are none, I don't believe. Deputations, we don't have any deputations. Confirmation of the minutes. There are no presentations, no, it's 7.2. Confirmation of the minutes of the Finance Policy Operations and Legislation Committee dated 8th of May 2022. Is there a second? I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Mofflin. Sorry, got to get my brain going. Councillor Mofflin. All those in favour? That is unanimous, is it? Councillor Sullivan? Yes.
He's not on the committee.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's right. Sorry. I'm sorry. I've just got to sort myself out and get this going. Part 9, elected member communication. Does any elected member wish to make a comment?
I'd like to take a few minutes just to talk about the parking situation we have in the city. I received an email from a constituent, and it was to do with a 91-year-old lady who got a parking ticket in Knutsford Street. The ticket was already issued. It was for $80. The constituent asked me whether I could represent the lady and to see if because they believed that there were some extenuating circumstances. This I did. I forwarded the email to Paul Garbett, and he took a couple of days. I asked him, in terms of our parking policy, were there any room for extenuating circumstances given the age of the lady and her health? And he took a couple of days, came back, and he said yes. Obviously there was some consideration taken, and it was decided that the parking ticket would be withdrawn. So to me, I thought it was a really good outcome. We have a policy. We would like to think that it's applied to everyone evenly. We have room within that policy for some discretion given certain circumstances. And in this case, it was a really good decision. A couple of days, it was the matter was resolved. Then we have been having email after email on a daily basis from 45 High Street, and we have a different scenario here. We have a situation of 3 car bays which each of the people who own those car bays pay $214 a month to the city. And we have 5 cars going into 3 car bays, which means that the ratepayers are missing out on the 214 times 2 times I don't know how many months this has been going on. The city knows about this. Now have a look at the resolution to this particular problem. We have, what came to my attention, what I thought was worthwhile having a look at, was some correspondence from the city where the city will redesign the car park. Don't worry about finding anybody that's illegally parked there. Even though the signage is there, it's very clear, the people who park there, that they can expect a fine. And we're going to remodel the car park at our expense to fit the other 2 car bays that are parking illegally. Now, at the end of the day, that wasn't possible. But I want to highlight that that's 2 different standards, and we need to get to the bottom of it. So I want to flag in this chamber that at the OCM, I will be introducing a motion on this matter, because I don't think it's good enough that a 91-year-old lady has a particular, being treated in a particular way. I tend to think it's a normal, fair way of doing it. And then we have a situation in 45 High Street, and it would seem to me there's a different standard that's been applied. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vucic. Are there any other elected member communications? Welcome, Councillor Pemberton. Okay, we move on to reports and recommendations. There aren't that many. I think we might just go through one by one and just deal with them on that basis. So I will move FPOL 22071, which is to do with the sole source of supply for the information technology system. Is there a seconder to that? Seconded by Councillor Pemberton. Is there any discussion on the recommendation, which is to go ahead with the sole supply? All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you. I'll move FPOL 22072, which is acceptance of a tender for provision of tree maintenance services. So seconded by Councillor Kamada. Is there any discussion? All those in discussion?
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
On page 11, we've got a budget here that we're putting towards the maintenance of trees in our city for $490,000. But we say here the spend of this contract is not fixed and may be varied to match the city's operational needs and available budget. Does that mean if we run short of money in some other bucket that we can go to this one? Or are we going to spend $490,000 on our trees?
Thank you. Through the chair. There are other items that come out of that budget. It's a general budget, but this contract spends against that budget. It's probably very likely that we'll spend up to the 490 in and around that budget. What they're saying is we won't overspend.
Okay.
So I can presume that there is a list of things that we're going to achieve in the city in terms of trees to the value of 490,000.
Through the chair. So there are 2 responsive areas of work. So part A is for power line utility management. So Western Power provide lists of trees that need to be lopped, and part A is set up to respond to that, so it's responsive. Part B is for more individual treatment of trees that might need pruning and or maintenance. So the guys will generate work in relation to that. So they're both slightly different, but both will do both planned and responsive work. So the contract is set up as a schedule of rates to reflect that.
One last question, if I may. Is that going to include the leaves, say, on South Terrace and various other parts of the city that the trees have shed, and there's a lot of it going into drainage? Are we going to be, is that part of that maintenance, we're going to be collecting some of that debris.
No, this is a tree pruning maintenance contract.
Okay. All those in favour of the motion? That is unanimous. Thank you. We move on to the section where it will be a council decision. So that's the previous two committee delegations. So these will be recommendations and go on to council. So I will move FPOL 22073 to do with the South Fremantle landfill site. Seconded by Councillor Moughlin. Is there any discussion on the recommendation? Councillor Pemberton? I'm aware that you have an amendment as well. Yeah, okay.
Am I speaking first?
Yes. You can, go for it.
All I want to, I guess I'm going to ask, look, the solar farm has been a contentious issue for some time. Do we have any idea what has been the cost of this solar farm project over the years to the council?
Through you, Chair, there has been no cost to the city other than officer time in normal salaried working hours time, dealing with the matter from the city's end. So the original EOI process and exclusive working agreement was structured on the basis that the proponent carried all the financial costs of investigating the feasibility of the project.
Councillor. Oh.
But I did forget. Thank you. And thank you very much for sorting out the microphone. Yeah, look, I guess I just wanted to speak very generally first around, I guess, the frustration that this has taken such a long time to come not that far. And also, it's interesting the reasoning behind Epurons and also the first operator who had the contract. In the first instance, both of them cited the difficulty in getting a power purchase agreement, and given that WA has a very different energy market here as a monopoly operator and so on, I do think that that is something that's deeply frustrating and something that needs to change. I also acknowledge that it's a complicated site and it's not that big a site, so I think there's also economies of scale. And I note the email that I received from Ed Blakely, who works in the industry, who gave sort of his insights and so on into the current situation, which I thought was really useful. And I guess in that, particularly just recognizing, this is a constantly changing area, and there are other kind of parameters around, like emission reduction targets and phasing out coal and that sort of stuff that are coming online now that might create new opportunities. So my amendment that I will move largely speaks to that around the idea of I recognise there may be a higher and better use than a solar farm at this stage, and that's why particularly, and I thank Councillor Sullivan for his insights as well, because doing a bit of an update on the information about remediating the site or what other options might be available in terms of utilising the site is definitely worth doing, but I don't want to rule out the possibility of renewable energy. And I also recognise that things like battery storage might be a new relevant option perhaps for the table. So I definitely support the idea of the officers being able to have an updated look at the possibilities of this site. I just wanted them to factor in these elements.
Thank you. So Councillor Pemberton has moved the amendment. Is there a seconder to the amendment? I'm happy to second the amendment. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? No? All those in favour of the amendment? That is of the amendment. Yep. Got that. Those against? Okay. further discussion on the item as a whole? Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, sorry, and I didn't speak to the amendment. I was just still getting my head around it. So apologies, Councillor Pemberton, that I didn't speak to that. But yeah, I think the two things for me why I fully support us having a look at the alternative uses, particularly around the opportunity for us from a development perspective, and also that scale aspect for me makes me certainly believe that solar on that site isn't one that is achievable at a reasonable level. And again, also to Councillor Sullivan's points that he shared earlier, the opportunities that come within a development or a potential development on that site, which could include renewable energy components to that as well, which might be able to achieve similar type outcomes. So yeah, very supportive of the recommendation as it stands, but and I'll also support with the alternative as created by Councillor Pemberton.
You were registered as not supporting it in the vote for the amendment?
That's right. Yep,
okay,
but I'll vote for
yep.
overall for.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, just clarifying that. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Councillor Archibald. Just because I figured you might need some light reading, I did bring along, Councillor Thompson's probably got a copy of this, he probably knows it inside out. I think this is one of the volumes of the South Fremantle landfill site study back from 2006 and 2008. Goes through some of the assessment of, well, there's an environmental assessments of the actual contamination, but also of the types of options that led to trying to understand the business plan for whether it was viable in that era to think about redevelopment and remediation. And of course, that was the decision or the process that led to the decision that said we just can't afford it. It's interesting that the site is has a very long and interesting history. It's kind of sad in some ways that the site has been left to the city of Fremantle alone to deal with. Given anecdotally, and most tip sites are anecdotally, that significant amounts of the some of the worst parts of the contamination actually come from government sources. Now, whether that can be fully verified or not, but it is a whole of society kind of problem, and it was a whole of society tip site. So, I think the era of saying to local governments, particularly a small one like Freo, that it's your baby, you sort it out, I think probably needs to be kind of retested. And it's important to understand just how pivotal that could be for the city. We would all love, I think, to not have a significantly contaminated site on our doorsteps. We would all in our community like to think that the council was able to get on with significant redevelopment of that land in all of its forms. And of course, that will include open space. It will presumably include sustainable development. So I kind of feel like we don't get these opportunities coming along very often. This is an opportunity. So we shouldn't rush into, I guess, extending the notion of the solar farm, and likewise, we shouldn't rush into what might also be able to be achieved. So I'm pretty confident, 12 years on, that the technologies and the opportunities will have changed enough to warrant us to have another fairly major look at that site. And I think that's, cutting the ties or cutting the solar farm from the past to allow us to sort of start afresh is probably the best way to do that. I do worry, and it's been more than a decade since I even looked in any detail at this document, but I do worry about the contamination that is actually in the groundwater, that's actually mobile, as opposed to the sort of contaminants that are in there that are just stationary and left untouched, still just going to be the same in 10 years' time. So we are monitoring that. We do annual or biannual. I can't remember. I think it's gone to bi now. Yeah, used to be annual monitoring, but we do need to get it sorted out. I mean, in 10 years' time, I think our society would expect, well, why haven't we got it sorted out? So, yeah, I'm encouraging of us to move forward, and I think this report's timely for that. It's timely for the strategic community plan as well. But it's also, I don't want to see the entire Coburn Coast area redeveloped, and then for us to think about how to sort out the problem halfway between Fremantle and a massive brand new development area. It's only going to get harder to remediate that site if we have to indeed go in and dig it up or dig parts of it up. So, the sooner we hopefully deal with that, the better. So, yeah, bring it on, I say.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Councillor Pemberton?
I just wanted to add, and I guess I wanted to make it really clear, even with my amendment, I'm not completely wedded to the solar farm going forward. I do. I just thought that it's better to keep it in the mix as a possibility. My interest at this stage is particularly around that investigation into the potential uses and the potential remediation processes and associated costs. Because the thing that really stood out with me in the report was sort of this statement saying that it wasn't economically viable to remediate the site within 20 years. And it was like, well, where did that come from? Why do we think that? And when did we think that? Because maybe, if that was 12 years ago, then does that mean that it's viable in 5 years, for example? So I think that definitely needs to be part of the work. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Thompson?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, look, I'd agree with everything that Councillor Sullivan has just said, and indeed, I think that at the end of the day, it's any use as a solar site is probably the least efficient use of that site if we could use it. Just in the context of remediation, though, again, Councillor Sullivan is right. When I can remember, one of the issues we looked at many years ago was actually putting a rail spur into the site and actually sort of remediating it and digging it out and putting it in trains and sending it off somewhere. But I think the whole issue of site remediation of old tip site has moved on since then, and it's not. And again, we're not a small puddle. This is an issue that faces at least 3 other councils that I know of who now realise that they have significant portions of land which have significant value, which could be remediated. So I think that we will see in the next few years a lot of movement in terms of remediating tip sites purely for economic reasons, if nothing else. So, so I'm happy with the recommendation as it is. As I said, I would support it without the amendments, but I'm quite happy to support the amendments as well.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion from anyone else? I'll just make the comment that I actually did some field work at the South Fremantle tip site back in the 70s when I was with the museum, and it was very dusty. A lot of excavating had been going on in parts of it as well, and we found some really interesting old geological structures and lacustrine deposits and all this sort of stuff. But the one thing I did find was I walked into this small lake of oil, and you couldn't see it because it was covered with dust, but people were putting anything into that tip site. The oil would now be dissipated because it would have had more stuff dumped into it and it's got soil over the top, but it was pretty messy. We were there because a jawbone of a wombat, which is more than 25,000 years old, had been found in Mather Road Quarry, and so we kind of did both quarries, looking at the two of them. But Yeah, it was. I can remember walking around, and that was just pretty awful what went into that tip. Anything somebody didn't want, whatever it was, it went there. So, I mean, I think it's great that the council start having a look at what is there, but it might still be a lengthy journey to fix the problem. Yeah. So I'm very happy to support the recommendation.
Pretty well unsupervised at the time, I think, Madam
Yeah,
Chair.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, all those
Can
in
I
favour. Sorry.
can I just say, look, I agree with Councillor Sullivan and everything that's been said here this evening. We have, I think I've got that second volume at home, Councillor Sullivan. We have got a lot of information already on the tip. It's, you know, there's thousands of dollars of research here, which I think we need to go through again and keep what is relevant and perhaps have a look what is not relevant, as opposed to starting all over again.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all those in favour of the motion as it is amended? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to FPOL 22074, the Fremantle Oval Redevelopment Business Plan. I'll move that. Is there a seconder to the motion? Seconded by Councillor Pemberton. Did you wish to make a comment? No. Is there any discussion on the recommendation as it's written?
Thank you.
Sorry, the Mayor wishes to speak according to me.
It's just the microphone that I seem to have. Thank you. This was the main reason I came along tonight, and I know it's going to full council, but I wanted to sort of seed some thoughts. I haven't got a motion, and obviously I'm not on the committee, so. But I also wanted to maybe seed it in a way that gets feedback as well. For me, the document is really exciting. It's the insight I think that the consultants have brought in terms of how to set up an operational structure when you've got potentially different organisations that are typically or principally focused on their fairly narrow fields of operation, if that's not a pun. And the thing about that is, you know, it has proved in the past to be incredibly hard to get the previous tenant arrangements people to work together. They were often in conflict. But what this structure or proposed structure does is it brings them together in a way that I think will be fairly unique in sports arenas, but very much to the benefit of how the whole entity works, so that they are actually working together in a new team that actually runs the place. So I don't have any problem at all, and in fact I commend the work that the CEO has done and also the consultants have done and that the clubs have done in bringing those ideas further forward. The area that I have, I guess, a need to put more input into, and I hope others feel the need to do that too, is really more in the master planning part of the document. You will recall we sort of started off with, I think it was it called the master plan previously, but there was an overarching plan of the Oval as to how we might sort of progress it. This goes into a fair bit of detail because it's now starting to show us sort of buildings. They're not actual buildings, and the report emphasises that it's not architecture as such, but it is kind of like a bubble diagram how it would all sort of fit together loosely, and what sort of things might be in it, and how they interrelate. But it also presents a whole bunch of things in terms of the Oval itself as well. I just want to sort of quickly go through a couple of dot points for the committee's consideration, but also to see whether or not perhaps we'll need to put these into some sort of an amendment for full council, and whether this is in fact the right time. Because I don't want to bog the process down in detail, but it does seem to me that at some stage we need to start talking about the detail in the master plan to make sure that we get it on the right track. So things like parking. In the early days, I kept pushing for parking, and there didn't seem to be much thrown in there. Now there's 2 levels of parking proposed, and whether or not that's feasible will happen in time as we do geotechnical reports and decide whether it's cost efficient to dig down that way or the like. But parking absolutely for me needs to be optimised because we have lost so much in that area. We're going to lose even more when we deal with the oval, but we're actually putting a much more intensive usage in that area, so we're going to need that. Likewise, the vehicle movements through the site. I'm not convinced that the way it's currently proposed in the planning fully does that. So again, I think that's going to be an area where we're going to need to look more closely at it, and particularly at the southern end. You will have, probably got sick of me going on about the laneway on the south side of the hospital. South side of the proposed police station, and how important that was in terms of the redevelopment of the hospital precinct and the southern end of the oval. And again, it just feels like it's the back entrance. It's not even the back entrance. It's the servants' entrance. It's the alleyway. It's the dunny cart going into the back of the oval at the moment. And for me, that's we shouldn't start off with that approach. We should be starting off with an approach that this is an opportunity to get a southern gateway into the oval and a new gateway up into the hospital precinct. And I would think that that's going to be very important. One of the things that really worries me in terms of the architecture as it's shown is the amount of seating that's proposed in the stand and the configuration of that seating. Some of you, I think, are going to be going to the South Fremantle Footy Club's game this weekend. Unfortunately, I can't go. But anyone that goes there, and if any of you aren't going and can still go, please go and have a look at the amount of seating that already exists at the South Fremantle Football Club and the way it is used and the types of people that are using it. And then imagine what it might be like in 10 years' time or 20 years' time or 50 years' time. Because the waffle clubs are redeveloping themselves. They have been getting increases and increases in both membership and attendance. And there is no suggestion that that's slowing down. What the proposal that we have in the documents, and you can see it, I think it's on page 62, but we have, I think it's about 5, 6, 7 rows of seats where there were currently about 20 or 18 or 20. And they're quite close to the edge of the stand. And what worries me about the way it's configured is, sure, there's a roof directly over the top of it, but anybody that knew anything about waffle football knew that South Fremantle was the wettest, windiest, bleakest place to go and watch football, because we were always getting a storm through here and we were always getting pelted with horizontal rain. I worry that while there might be some, theoretically some seats under cover, I very much doubt whether the ones that are shown on the leading edge of that will be premium seating in the sense that that's the sort of seating that you'd want for members and to be able to attract members. To me, it's got about half as much of the seating that it needs. And I know that's been through discussions with the clubs and the like, but having toured Claremont Football Club and with Graham Moss, the great Graham Moss, and hearing the frustration from the club about the development that they had just been handed over, about, who designed this? This isn't even fit for purpose. So, I committed myself at that time to say, we can't make these same mistakes. And it feels very much to me that we need to double that sort of capacity. Another aspect is the space between the seating and the oval. Now, again, if you go to the footy, you know that at quarter time and at half time and at 3/4 time, everybody gets out of their seat. Not everybody, a lot of people get out of their seat and they walk down to the oval and they go and interact with the players. They stand around the huddles, all of those sorts of things. Now it feels like, Premier League soccer sort of scenario where you're 2 metres off the ground, 2.5 metres off the ground. There's no interconnection between you and the oval. You're kind of like, it's a spectator scenario now. Whereas traditionally, these clubs have been very much every member that's sitting in those stands feels like they're one of the coaches. So they're community clubs. So you disconnect the seating and the club rooms from the oval, and you completely change the type of club that it is. So it's not fit for purpose in that sense. And I know why they've done it, and they did it at Claremont, and it doesn't work. But it is again something that I think has to be nuanced through the process. Then there's Victoria Hall. Now, Victoria Hall is a really important thing, but its fundamental heritage is its relationship as one of Australia's first football stands. I mean, there are a few older ones in Victoria, but not many. And it has to be, into the future, a great place to watch football from. Not just from the stand, but in the space between the stand and the actual oval. And we can't we can't create an urban design environment that doesn't have, at the very least, a quality stadium feel between or for members of the public and for watching football or for any other event for that matter. So I worry about that, and I also worry about the space between Victoria Pavilion and the new building. At the moment, and I think this is coming from our heritage architects, or could be from the urban design, I'm not sure, but they're trying to flatten it out. And you can't watch football from a flat piece of land. You need a terrace, you need a bank. And there's a little bar there currently that's one of the most popular spots to watch football from because it does have that raking feel to it. Now, we're always going to end up with conflicts. And one of the conflicts, it seems to me, is that people in an urban design sense have this sense that we need to be able to see down Norfolk Street and see the oval itself. And so they want to flatten that area out so you can see the oval. It used to be that people said we need to be able to look down Norfolk Street or Parry Street, but the last bit of the old Norfolk Street, and you need to be able to see the prison. No one was worried about seeing the oval. They actually wanted the vista up to the prison. So the way we've configured it in this sketch is to cut the view of the prison out, but to give the view of the oval. Now, the view of the prison's lost because of the trees on the other side anyway, and you'd have to underprune them to get it. But that's possibly going to happen anyway. But for me, if we focus too heavily on trying to get a view of the oval for someone at the traffic lights up on the corner, but we don't give a quality stadium experience for the person actually in the ground watching the football, then we've kind of got it around the wrong way. The other part about, and it becomes a critical, pivotal space, that space between these two buildings. Because if you want to get Victoria Pavilion to really, really function well, it's going to need to be exceptionally well connected to the new build, not feel like it's two separate buildings. And that's what it currently feels like, and that's what it will continue to feel like in the proposal as it stands. So there's going to need to be some compromise and some work done on that area. I've probably covered most of the things about the building. The other thing that you will notice in the document that it has a lot of landscape narrative about the rest of the oval, the eastern flanks up near the prison and the like. What it hasn't done, and I understand why there's a sort of a stage 2 and a stage 3 to this to do with the hospital, but it hasn't looked hardly at all at the relationship between the oval and the hospital precinct, and it hasn't looked hardly at all at the interrelationship between the prison and the front gate of the prison and the really important convict era buildings in the hospital, which need to be interconnected. And Councillor Archibald and I went and had a look at the original laundry, but there's also the old knoll up there, which you can see from the Oval, but we need to actually make a lot more of it. But more importantly, we want to make that eastern flank a public open space. So that space between the Oval leading up to the prison has been, let's say, compromised over the last 120 years, to the extent that we've got, we put a wall up between the Oval and the prison. It used to be this gradual, basically remnant hill between the Oval and the prison. And you used to get sheep. There was basically a sheep paddock on the slope. It was a place that was a gentle slope, whereas now it's quite hard to use that space. And of course, on the other side of the wall, on the prison side of the wall, it's just a sea of bitumen and car parking. It's not it's one of the best places. Go up there. One of the best places in our city to view our city from. It really commands to become one of the best urban or parkland environments. And to do that, we need to stop seeing it as being this arbitrary straight line between the Oval and the prison, as if everything on the other side of that straight line, where there used to be a corrugated iron fence, is not part of this conversation. So again, we're going to need to sort of do a lot more work in those areas. Having said all that, and I want to try and maybe do a dot point version of that for council, but having said all that, the fundamental primary purpose of the item in front of you is to develop, it's the development of a business, governance, management and operational model for the Oval, and to that extent, it's a really good document. But the second part of it is it's a proposed concept and operational plan, and it's the concept that's worrying me, and we do need to get it right, but we don't need to stop to get it right. We just need to acknowledge that we need to get it right and use the document as it is to go out and get that funding, to go out and pursue the agreements with the clubs about the operation and the like. But if we don't acknowledge the problems with the concept at this stage, then if I try and come along in a year's time or 2 years' time and say, I think we haven't got it exactly right, everybody will say it's a bit late in the day to be introducing a new component to this. It will be too late in the day. So that's why I want you to consider that we make sure that we include a whole bunch of things just as dot points, as reminder points, so that when we go to the next phase and we hopefully get some funding, we can start fine-tuning that. And we can be working on that in the interim with a lot more people than perhaps are currently inputting into the process. Thank you, and I apologise. I've spoken a long time, but this is one of our strategic imperatives. This is one of the most important projects that we will do over the next 50 years. So let's get it right.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. I just wanted to make the comment that this recommendation is really just using, as Councillor Sullivan said, we're going to use the current plan as it is, because really we need to bed down issues like Commonwealth and state support for the project in general. I mean, if we don't get to that point, there isn't a lot of point in spending a lot more time on this. So it's not, we're not saying this is the design and we're signing off. We're just simply saying we're using this to go forward. So this is not locking us into anything at all, except we want to continue with the advocacy process and get more support clarified. So is there any further discussion on this, Councillor Kamada?
Yeah, for my comments, for what it's worth, thank you, Councillor Sullivan, for your detailed account and your thoughts. And I think it was, I'd like to touch on some of the notes that I had that you have already raised. I certainly think it's an exciting proposal. I think that anyone that has grown up watching football around Fremantle will appreciate the comments you've made about keeping the ambience of the ground and being able to feel like you're part of the action and part of a community club. And Claremont, it's very interesting that you raised Claremont, and that is for anyone who saw Claremont previous to the development and the way it is now. I think it's a disaster in terms of football. I know they've got all the nice apartments and everything around, but I've gone to the ground to watch my son play in recent times, and you cannot get out of the weather. So we don't want something like that, that's for sure. The Victoria Pavilion, I did also, looking at those plans, I think it looks great. And I'm wondering if it was originally flat at the bottom and that they've built the terracing up later on. And I'm hoping that there will be still some sort of, I suppose, terracing going up to the stand, even if it's slight, so that people can still gather and watch in front of the Victoria Pavilion, because that has been a really great place to watch football for many years. The old Fremantle Dockers building that was built in the southwest corner, I think we can learn from that as well. I think it took a lot away from the character that end of the ground. It was a really good place to watch footy, and the old Doig Pavilion was just such a fantastic spot when you had 15, 20,000 people at Fremantle Oval. And I just felt that they could have done that a little bit better, just maybe set it back a bit more and keep a bit of the terracing. And just something to look, towards in other parts of the ground as this development goes forward. And to finish off, I think it's early days, as Councillor Archibald stated, and that I think that with future consultation and modelling, hopefully we'll be able to deliver the concept that Councillor Sullivan is talking about. Thank you.
Any further, Councillor Moughlin?
Thank you. And thanks for everyone's contribution to the discussion so far. And I think most probably tonight, like the FPOL agenda seemed quite light, but actually we've got three really important sites that we're talking about this evening, and importantly, they're all going to council for us to have those conversations. So I thank everyone for the thought that they've brought to it. And I certainly viewed this document in the same sense that Councillor Archibald referred to, that this is essentially the principles or the indicative work that we would like to see. And I think that detailed design work is really important to get right, and to make sure that we do get a venue which meets not only the needs of the sporting clubs, but also that community use, and that we're not closing it off from those opportunities that exist, and that we get it set right in the entire precinct there. And in having viewed the document through that lens, I suppose I do have some reservations in regards to the model around the facility operator. And I would like us, as we progress through this process, to really get a better handle on how that might work. I do recall when we had the briefing from the consultant, he referred to a leisure centre in the outer suburbs of Melbourne, which had a similar kind of model. And for me, it wasn't necessarily the most robust example that could have been provided, and it would be good for us to be really clear that having that facility operator does provide the best benefit both for the Oval and for the community as a whole. But no, for me, those details can be worked through, and I'm fully supportive of the business plan. And also just want to make the point as well that, yeah, there might be elements in here which come 10 years down the track, hopefully we've had a redevelopment and it's occurred, and it could look distinctly different from what's in this plan. And I don't think we should be hanging ourselves on every word that sits in the plan, because it will develop over time. So yeah, thanks to staff for the good work that's occurred.
Is there any further comment? Okay, we'll move the motion as it stands. And all those in favour? It is unanimous. Thank you. And just to add to that, I think we don't need lots of dot points, in my view. I think it's really just to clarify that, further work will be undertaken on the various things, such as this, that, and the other. during the whole process. But until we've bedded down solid financial support and that sort of thing, there's really, there's not much point in us doing detailed work yet. Okay, we'll now move on to FPOL 22075, request for approval of proposed sale of 8 Point Street. I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Moughlin. Is there any discussion on this item? Councillor Pemberton.
I had some frustrations and concerns, but also some optimism about this one, because, obviously SKS have kind of been a long time doing nothing. But I was very concerned around the idea of walking away from all the kind of requirements and conditions we put in an agreement and so on, and what that might do for our credibility in going forward with other partners and projects and so on. But having reflected on it and talked with the CEO, I feel more comfortable with progressing with this as it is at the moment. And I guess that's in light of the fact that they have been doing the right thing by paying rates. We also got some parking revenue out of the project in the interim, and realistically, the income we've received from that is not worth picking a legal fight about the guarantee and so on, was the conclusion I came to. But it does speak to the matter that Councillor Jones has also raised in email, which was around retaining the parking for as long as possible as part of the terms of the agreement, to ensure that the site is both active but also given the kind of good deal, if you like, or the compromise in the extension and the adjustments of the original plans and so on. I feel like that's a good way forward, and thank the CEO for providing that initial feedback from Serona at this stage. So as I understand, there will be an amendment or some further information coming back to Council for the ordinary Council meeting to address specifically that matter, in terms of including some kind of element of requirement to put parking on the site during the meantime. I also acknowledge that, of course, when this deal was first done, there was a recognised deficit of hotel accommodation in Fremantle, and it was widely being talked about, and it was kind of prolific through the whole metro area, really, Perth City as well. That is no longer the case, and so I think it's very wise to take that off the agreement, because we don't necessarily want an oversupply of hotels that then sit empty or don't succeed. So I think that end of town is kind of prime for residential development, and if there's an element of mixed use, then that would be great, but I also think it shouldn't necessarily be fully required. So this idea of not wanting to spread the party too thin across the CBD, and when you think about the activation of Victoria Quay and the potential redevelopment down at Fishing Boat Harbour and Fremantle Oval and so on, we might pull people to all ends of our city. That means that none of them work. But if we get more people living close walking distance in our city, I think that'll be a really great outcome. So, yeah, just wanted to flag that in terms of the parking matter coming to the ordinary council meeting.
Yeah, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this item? As was said, more information will come through to the council meeting, so we don't, need to try and solve all problems here tonight, but it's good to raise the issues. Yeah. Councillor Vucic, sorry, I can't see the name, so just put your hand up.
When I have a look at the SKS letter and their conditions, I see the best possible alternative.
No.
Will it work now?
Yep, it's going now.
Okay, thank you. Just a recap. When I see SKS letter here, is the best possible scenario for a business. The recommendation For the ratepayers, I see a pretty poor result. And I'm not saying that what's before us to be considered ought not to be part of the mix. But we've got a long way to go before we have a look at this option. We have got so many other options to have a look at. If we have a look at the narrative of how we got here, 2012, the land, the asset gets sold, we get 10 million in our coffers, $200,000 is the bond. Over a period of time, we give extension after extension after extension. 10 years later, you know, they want to sell it on to a third party. This sort of sounds like the Spicer Street deal as well. With similar situation of extension after extension, thrown to get it finally, and they flip it in a heartbeat to Forest Group for a profit. But we don't know that simply because it's commercial and confident. But it is a ratepayer who missed out on that profit. Now we have the similar situation with the Point Street car park. SKS wants to flip it to Serona. If I know anything about business, the deal's already done and there is a profit. The only thing is it's not the ratepayer going to make it. And this is where we fall down. We are going to be looking at a budget next week. And what I see in this budget, I don't see a lot of fat in this budget. I don't think we can even do a half a kilometre of new footpath. We certainly can't maintain our basic services to the level that we ought to. We're way behind in our heritage maintenance. We have got cuts in our services, downgrading of our services. And then I have a look what's before me to say, well, that's the best deal we can do. I would like to see every option on the table. The buyback, why should we not have a look at the buyback? We haven't even got a new valuation of this asset, and we've been asked to just consider 10 million. It might be worth 15 million. We don't know that. So I think before we actually look at this option as the only option, we should look at every other option that's exhausted, and then I would look at this and say, well, that's just the best out of a rotten lot, and I can live with it. But I can't live with what's in front of me right now.
Thank you. Councillor Pemberton? Can we just get clarification from the CEO about what the buyback actually means, the terms of the buyback as it is written in the agreement?
Just through the chair, under the buyback arrangements, we either buy it back at the price that it was purchased at or fair market value. So we would have to buy it back at whatever the current value is. We'd have to go through a business case under the Local Government Act to do that. It'd probably take us 6 months to get to the point where we may be in a position to even agree to purchase it back. So whilst there's a buyback provision in there, we still have to follow the terms and clauses of the Local Government Act to do that.
Key point being that we'd have to buy it back at fair value potentially. Yeah.
Is that the same for the future? If this goes through and for the next stage, the new owners, is it the same deal for the buyback?
Yeah, so I've slightly modified the agreement this time because we weren't. Remember, this was 2012. What we said this time is we buy it back at either the current purchase price or fair market value, whichever's the lesser.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just add a few points. Yeah, I mean, everyone saw my email this morning, and I think Councillor Pemberton summed it up with, frustration, concerns, and optimism all at the same time. And I just feel I'm glad it's going to full council, but I'm just not confident at this point to be able to make a decision without a little bit more information. And that's why I asked about those, about the various options and just getting some feedback on the lot. I mean, you've answered one of them just now in terms of the buyback. The most unlikely scenario would be action would be to force to go down the track of trying to force the SKS to go ahead with the project, obviously, but that would be the most unlikely. But the other options, I think, yeah, I'd like to just get a little bit more feedback on. Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mofflin?
And yeah, maybe just to follow up on that, and a question to the CEO in the first instance in regards to if we were looking at an option around purchasing the property again, the funding to be able to do so, how would the city consider that funding?
Yep, through the chair, that's exactly right. We'd need to find the funding to do it as well. So that's part of the conversation. If I may just take a little bit more license here. So the reality is we've always pushed for this site to be redeveloped. This proposal still looks to push for that redevelopment. The SKS will need to pay the cost of the transfer over to the other side, so there's no indicative cost to us, which is why in the end we let go the bond amount, because the bond was an inconvenience fee. Basically, if we had to take the site back, we would then have to do all the things to sell it again, likely, and advertise it and pay real estate agents and all those sorts of things. So the $200,000 bond was an inconvenience fee. I agree with Councillor Pemberton. The fact that through the process of extension, they allowed us to earn some revenue from the parking as well was sort of, a pretty fair approach on their behalf as well to some of that inconvenience. In this particular matter, our goal is to try and get that site redeveloped as soon as we possibly can, and I still think this is probably the fastest way of achieving that.
Councillor Mofflin?
Yeah, thank you. That was good information, and yeah, I suppose in terms of getting that site redeveloped as well, and with the news today in regards to the new ownership of the wool stores there, I think there's a great opportunity for us to not spread our city out maybe, but to create that other node within our city to be able to create homes for people to live in and bring more people into town, which we've been pushing for many years, and council prior wanted to be able to do so. Yeah, the three options for me presented, it seems like this is the best option that we have, unless we are going to stump up a huge amount of funds to be able to make this happen, and then deal with another 12, 18, 24 months of trying to get a new owner. I wouldn't like to see us in some sort of legal battle with SKS to try and get them to develop, and to get a new owner on that site who's willing to develop. I think it's a really positive outcome, pending some of that information that other councillors are keen to look at and make sure that we can make that decision in good conscience.
Is there any further discussion? I'll just add that, yes, we've got 2 weeks, so I advise people to thoroughly inform themselves of all the detail between now and council. That would be, and it is an important decision, but like Councillor Mofflin said, I'm quite pleased to see today the press release about the old wool stores being redeveloped for residential, and this proposal is likewise looking at residential. I think that would really strengthen that sector, and so I'm quite excited about the idea of it going to residential rather than a hotel. But yes, let's make sure we're all fully informed about the details before the council meeting. Yeah.
Councillor Thompson, one of the bits I've asked for absolutely is that the proposed deeds be finalised for the council meeting. We know certainly also with learning from the Spicer site that you can have a two-way conversation for a long time unless we say let's get the deed up to be actually approved by council that's already been agreed. If they don't provide that deed, I will withdraw this item for council and put it up the following month, because I want that deed, and I've made it very clear to them that the deeds have to be agreed and put up before council will consider. So you will actually see the full deeds for council. They'll be attached.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Oh, you've just a question, Madam Chair. I recall reading something about the split of the parking income, that some of it went to SKS, and some. I just wonder whether there's a capacity for us to tweak that a bit to increase the amount of parking income we get. So it's just a question whether it's worth looking at. In other words, I'd like to see perhaps a slightly, rather than just the same deal kind of rolled over, a deal which actually provides us with a little bit more income.
Just through the chair, I'll comment. So the agreement with SKS has been that we receive 20% management fee and then split the net after that 50-50. I have spoken with Serona in relation to this, mainly prefacing originally that we just want to keep a car park there during the interim period. Our preference would be that we manage it, of course. If they feel they can fix up the multi-deck car park, then do so and keep the multi-deck there. If they feel the multi-deck's not fit for purpose for them moving forward, then knock it down and we'll continue with the at-grade. But a car park in the interim is desired by the city, absolutely. The commentary hasn't really, the conversation hasn't really focused on us necessarily needing to manage it, but certainly the conversations I've had with them the last few days is about us particularly managing it for them. I'm waiting for them to come back. The current managing director of Serona Urban is in the UK, so the conversation is going slow between us at the moment, but I've made it pretty clear to him what council's intentions are. It may not necessarily be in the deed, it may be by separate agreement, by the way. It's similar to the way we have it with SKS at the moment.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, acknowledging this goes to council. Those against? Councillor Vucic and Councillor Kamada. Against. Okay, we now move on to the budget amendments. FPOL 22076. I'll move that motion. Is there a seconder? Councillor Thompson, would you like to second that? Thank you. Is there any discussion? Councillor Vucic, have you got any discussions on the budget amendments tonight?
Actually, I was going to, but I think I'll give you guys a reprieve.
Good on you. Okay, is there any further discussion? All those in favour? That is unanimous, thank you. Right. There are no motions of which previous notice has been given. There is no urgent business, I take it. No late items, no confidential business. I declare the meeting closed. Thank you. 7:08. Thank you.